Hi, my name's Dominique, and together with my team, we produce the content for our weekly Swisspreneur episodes. I hope you enjoyed today's show.
Asia's got such a great potential, and they're really moving ahead fast.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and hands-on learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Doris, very well, welcome back to the second episode of the Swisspreneur podcast. It's a pleasure to have you again.
With pleasure on my side.
Today we're going to talk about the topic of expanding your business to Asia. And I want to start with the first question about mistakes. So what mistakes do you see Swiss companies making repeatedly when it comes to expanding their business to Asia?
I think they make less and less mistakes because there's a lot of consulting going on. But I think the biggest mistake probably a lot of companies still make is when they're entering Asia, they're not managing it. They have to make sure, let's put it this way, they have to make sure they do the expectation management properly. Because, after 6 to 12 or 18 months, everybody on the board has forgotten that it's still a startup, and then they start questioning whether it's the right place to be or whether you should pull out again. I think that question has to be raised up front, and also to be, that is something which I probably cannot highlight enough, but really to dig into the cultural issues, because I think, Asia, it has different Asian countries have different cultures, same as we in Europe have different cultures. But the differences between a collective society and an individual society are really huge. That has to be managed. And I think if you really make sure that you have you know something about your culture and you're interested in your culture, in the culture of a company, then it makes it a lot easier. And also to get proper consulting. There are a lot of experts on the ground, and also in Switzerland, like Switzerland Global Enterprise, or in our company we do it. And I think you really have to get that expertise before you move in. Yeah. And then making sure you're sending the right team. And also, as soon as possible, making sure that you build up with local employees.
Yeah. So basically, get clear about the expectation management and also prepare well for the cultural differences and everything else that is attached to that. What role does the financial power play? Because I can imagine building a new market, especially in Asia, something that you're completely unfamiliar with, most likely, takes probably more time than you would anticipate and probably also costs quite some money. So what role does the financial power play?
It's like everywhere, it costs double the money you wanted to invest, and it takes double the time. And it really is true, because I think if you want to build up a brand new market, which is so totally different, then you really have to make sure that you have enough financial muscles in order to build up the company. And not if you just say, well, that's my limitation, and if it doesn't work after 2 or 3 years, I pull out again, then I would discourage a company from moving into such a place.
Let's now talk about the Asian market. You personally built Singapore, for example, also Hong Kong for the UBS translation services there locally. What is so impressive for you? Why is Asia actually important, and not as we currently are focused on North America, for example?
I would nowadays move first into Asia and then into North America.
Wow. Why?
Because I think, Asia's got such a great potential, and they're really moving ahead fast. They're highly entrepreneurial, especially Chinese. They're highly entrepreneurial, and they're moving ahead very, very fast compared to the West, that has become kind of complacent to some extent, especially Europe. And people have everything on their plate, and in Asia they still have to struggle to some extent to build up companies. So
the speed is really impressive there.
Yeah, and that's for me personally something which I really found thrilling. I'm always coming from Asia. Always came back, and was sure also in the future will come back totally energized, with new ideas, motivated, and things are moving very fast. Right. And especially then when you talking to head office, they sometimes don't understand why they're moving so fast and why they want everything at the same time. But we saw that with Serious Communications. Well, our IT department said, well, why do they need 2 screens open? If they don't answer within 10 or 20 minutes, the order is gone to the competitor. So we have to do something.
And that's an interesting environment to be in as a company.
Yeah.
Probably also very challenging and tough at the same time.
It is tough.
Stressful,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, also huge opportunities that lay in front of you.
Yeah, that's true. That's right.
So then, of course, you've seen many parts of Asia, and the question comes up, where in Asia should you actually go and move with your business?
I think that really depends on the products or services you're offering. Then one market might lend itself better than the other.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be more or less go on the safe side, I would suggest you could start with Singapore. Have a small organization in Singapore because. You know, the former president wanted to position Singapore as Switzerland of Asia, and he really managed to do that.
Right.
As a safe haven, it's kind of a. We usually say Singapore is kind of a Asia for beginners.
So then that's a good starting point, I guess.
It is. We actually built up Singapore and Hong Kong at the same time. So in parallel, and then the year afterwards we started off with Shanghai and then Beijing. And Shanghai was actually the main operation in Asia when it came to translations. And Singapore had more, then we had translators down there, but it was also sales. And you usually have, if you go to Asia, you usually have to be in different places. One place usually is not enough.
So what would be a good mix there? If you start with Singapore, should you also go for Hong Kong and then China, or what is a good mix from your perspective?
That is, as I said, it depends on the services and the products you're having. Or you might also start directly in mainland China, but mainland China is a tough marketplace.
Why? What makes it so difficult?
It's a huge market, but it's totally different from, for instance, Singapore or Hong Kong. Singapore and Hong Kong are more organized, for us more approachable than mainland China.
So also closer to the Western mentality or way of doing things.
A little bit. They do it differently, but it's closer.
Closer than China. Yeah. But eventually you want to go to China because it's such a huge and also attractive and rapidly growing market. So when would actually China make sense and when does it not make sense?
I think China makes sense if the products and services you're offering, if they are required on the market. And for us, it was important because, you know, if you work for global companies, then they want you to cover the Asian market as well. Otherwise, you lose your European business or your US business.
Right.
Especially for global contracts, for global tenders, you need to be on all places.
Mm-hmm. We talked about timing in the first episode. Also, here timing is important. So, is there a right timing to move to Asia with your business, or is there also anything as moving there too soon or too early?
I think what you could do, for instance, what a company can do, they can do a market checkup for their readiness for expansion, no matter to which country, and that is offered by Switzerland Global Enterprise.
Nice. I think this is a state or government-backed organization, but you still have to pay for certain services, obviously. So, do you know, is there a certain price tag that you could budget for such an assessment?
Oh yes, but I would have to check back with them because I was serving on their board of directors for 12 years, and they have price tags. Of course, I think the first hour is free of charge, and then afterwards you pay for it. But I did the market check for a review for our company in Dubai with them, and that was very, very reasonable.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
For an SME, it's reasonable. Yeah.
And what do you look at there in such an assessment? So, what speaks for, okay, it's a good time to move there, and what speaks against that to move to Asia?
I think it depends on the management team, whether management team is ready for expansion, whether they have the necessary skills for internationalization. It's also a question of their finances. Can they really afford risks? Because, you know, if it suddenly costs double as much as you've planned, does the company go bankrupt, or can they survive with it?
Right.
That's the kind of thing you have to check. Yeah.
I know this is incredibly difficult to answer, but is there like a certain minimum from your experience where you say, if you want to expand to Asia, that's like the least that you have to expect to have at least a certain likelihood of success?
That really depends. I was consulting one company and advising one company, and they wanted to have an intercultural program from us and doing business in Singapore, and that company was strikingly successful right up front.
Wow.
You can have a lucky punch and get successful right up front, or then you have to build it up from scratch.
True. And the second one takes way more time.
Way more time.
Yeah, got it. Now let's also say, okay, you made the decision to go to Asia with your business. What should you look out for? Assuming that the assessment of Global Enterprise, Switzerland Global Enterprise went well, you now want to take the plunge and move to the Asian markets. What do you do? What do you do next to really make that happen? And what are some good resources that you can make use for yourself?
Yeah, for instance, if you take the example of Singapore, for instance, you can go to the Economic Development Board, and it's super easy to build up a company in Singapore. You need an accounting firm, you need an HR firm, you can talk to, you need a lawyer, and then you can build up. But then it's super fast.
Okay.
And then also, it's advisable to make sure that you have your finances under control. And sometimes it's good to have one from the head office or a Westerner in the team. And then gradually, in the beginning we had only expats, and then in the end we had only one expat, that was the regional CEO, and we built it up with local employees.
Yeah. But
you need those checks and balances, especially in mainland China. There you definitely need it.
Why? What makes it so difficult or different?
Yeah, because understanding is sometimes different. For instance, a typical example is this in-group versus out-group. And my colleague once told me that one company said to the controller he should do a new expense sheet or something like that, and then he introduced it, but only within his department and not with the rest of the company. Right. So it's really, sometimes you really have to make sure that if you communicate something that is really understood. That is
a bit more difficult.
It's a bit more difficult, but it's rewarding. It's rewarding.
Also talking about the legal setup, do you need to found a legal entity in the Asian markets directly from day one, or do you serve certain parts of that still with your Swiss legal entity? How do you do that setup?
We founded it straight up front.
Okay.
Because otherwise you have representative offices and then you cannot really offer services. So we founded an LTD right up front. That's super easy in Singapore and costs virtually nothing.
Then you also do have all the administrative part like payroll, accounting, bank account, all of these details.
And those you better outsource.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're really operationally active there in Singapore, for example.
Yeah.
If you choose Singapore, does that also give you easy access to the other Asian markets? So is Singapore a good hub to start and also gives you access to the Chinese market, for example?
Well, actually, that was very strange. My experience was that when you had an office in Singapore and you wanted to do business in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong client wanted to know exactly how many people are working for him in Hong Kong. He didn't care about Shanghai, didn't care about Singapore, how many in Hong Kong. So you usually need both places.
And if you have Hong Kong and Singapore to now enter, China, for example, or Japan, South Korea, whatsoever, can you serve them with your legal entities from Hong Kong and from Singapore, or should you go and found new legal entities in these?
Well, we did serve Japan out of Hong Kong, and that was not a really clever idea because in the end the clients told us, well, listen, you get more business, but you need an entity in Japan, in Tokyo. Yeah. And that's why we were in contact with a company to acquire them, to have a small hub in Japan as well.
Got it. So it really comes down to the localization to a certain degree.
Yeah.
Like here in Switzerland.
Do we want to be served from Germany?
True. Yeah.
Or from France?
In some parts it works, but it's not the common way of doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it really depends. I mean, if you're digital nomads, then it doesn't matter where in the world you sit.
True. But that's the difference, right? So there you're just selling your services, your hours or your product whatsoever, but you don't have a company with employees and maybe a stock whatsoever in the background. So
but I think this might change in the future. I mean, I could very well imagine that you could nowadays already you can buy services and products and services from all over the world. And this might change in the future because I don't think that it's necessary in the long run that you build up companies in all locations, or maybe just small setups.
True.
I think this pandemic season, this pandemic situation we're having right now, it really changes a lot. Be it home office, be it digitalization. I mean, it really changes a lot, and that could be a huge move, right?
So it would also be great to see then a positive effect of having less overhead that you need to create in order to get active in these markets, right?
Definitely, yeah.
So you mentioned, the lawyers, the banks that you need, the accountants, also Switzerland Global Enterprises is first support here from Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
Who else do you need to really have a successful market entry in Asia?
I think what is very valuable is to work with for instance, with the Swiss chambers, or in Hong Kong Swiss Business Association, in Singapore Swiss Cham, and Swiss Cham is also in Beijing, Shanghai, and a number of other Chinese places. It's really worthwhile attending their events, attending business events, so that you gradually can build up your network.
Mm-hmm.
I think network is key there, really, and to build up, to find out over time whom can you really trust. And there's some I heard of horrible examples where one Swiss entrepreneur sold a machine to a Chinese, and without a contract, without making sure the payment is getting done, and he was not paid in the end. And then he landed on the general consulate, and the general consul asked him, "Well, you wouldn't never do that with a Swiss?" Well, this person was so friendly, and we had such a great relationship of trust. Just because the Chinese was friendly doesn't mean that trust is there. That is kind of you're replicating the Swiss attitude to the Chinese, and that's wrong. That's really wrong. But I don't say all Chinese react this way, but that was an unlucky example.
But I think that's an important reminder to really do your homework and also the paperwork in that case, to not lose money in the end.
Yeah, and you still have to build up the relationship. I mean, in China, if you conclude a contract, and that's something sometimes misunderstood, it's the beginning of a negotiation, because you develop this contract over and over again. And for us, a contract is the conclusion of the negotiation, right?
Yeah, these small little changes in mentality can be crucial in the business world. And who teaches you that? Of course, if you do it and experience it yourself, then you learn by doing that. But do you learn that with the Swiss hubs that you just mentioned, or where can you actually learn?
Swiss hubs, yeah, exactly. We have the business hubs in all over the place. I mean, that's a great example as well to get access to. And they then advise you to several experts working in the space. So that's really our Swiss business hub network. That's a great institution. I think that really works well. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of benefits from them in our company. And it's also one of my first entries or the embassies. You can also work with the embassies. You can even do try to see whether you could do events together with them. And that's especially for Swiss small to medium-sized enterprise. That's a really good entry point, because then you have the umbrella of the embassy. Right. You have the ambassadors gives a presentation and so on and so forth. So that works. Or this, as I said, the Swiss champs, they do events as well. Mm-hmm. And when I'm in Asia, I'm usually looking what type of events are going on, and then I'm going to their luncheons or dinners or whatever. So to expand the network.
I think these are like 3 super helpful and very practical tips that you just gave. Awesome. Let's also look at the challenges. One that obviously comes to mind is the language. Mm-hmm. Most of us don't speak any language that is spoken in the Asian world. Mm-hmm. So how far do you actually go or get with English as a language?
It depends. To some extent, you get with young people, you get along well with English usually. And otherwise, you have to work with interpreters, or you have to work on, and even better, so you have to work with people on the ground that speak both languages, and they can also be then have a relay function to bridge those cultural gaps.
Right. Is there also a difference? So, for example, in Hong Kong or Singapore, you get much further with English than in Japan or China, for example?
Yeah, I mean Hong Kong and Singapore, English is a no-brainer. And in mainland China, it depends a bit where you are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you also recommend to try to learn the language, or is that just a game that you cannot
Well,
do?
I tried to learn it. And then I gave it up again because I think if you want to learn it, you probably have to invest a lot of time on site, and we usually say it takes you about 1.5 years at least till you can more or less do a decent conversation.
Yeah,
and I made one of the biggest mistakes you can do, and that's something which I would never recommend to anybody, but me as a former translator should have known it. I thought, okay, Doris, you want to move ahead fast. So I took 8 individual lessons per day.
Per day?
Per day.
Wow.
I can tell you, for 2 weeks, I was dead in the evening.
Yes. I'm sure you slept well.
And I continuously forgot what I learned,
Of course, yeah. It's too much. Yeah, complete overload. Yeah.
2 hours per day is enough.
Yes. Regulations are another point that can be a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So what can you talk about or tell us about the regulations in the Asian markets and how to deal with them?
Well, especially China is hugely difficult because they change regulations all the time, and sometimes you do things the wrong way without even knowing it.
Right. But then you can get in serious trouble.
Yeah, you can get in very, very serious trouble. And there you have to make sure that you work with experts on the ground, that they help you, because otherwise, as a foreigner, you just tap from one mistake to the next.
And who could be these local supporters for you? Where do you find them?
They could be, well, they can be found through the business hubs, for instance. They could be lawyers, mm-hmm. or large companies. They also hire. Large companies sometimes hire people that do nothing else but checking all the regulations all the time, because especially in the financial services market, it's highly regulated, and if you make mistakes there, then you're in real trouble. Mm. It's also a reputational risk for the corporation.
Yeah, makes sense. Another point that is not directly tied to regulations, but maybe we can call it internal regulations, is the corporate governance topic.
Yeah.
You mentioned the way that you set it up with having more like people from your own environment, from the Western world, and then you change that gradually. Mm-hmm. How do you actually ensure the corporate governance for your companies in Asia if you're not there too often yourself?
Yeah, you have to have reliable employees.
And that's, as I heard, is not the easiest thing to find.
It's not always easy. It's not that difficult, but you have to. It's best is always, I think, if you have checks and balances, mm-hmm. so that you maybe have a European or Westerner in there that helps with the finances, or you have the CEO and that oversees the controlling as well. Yeah. But we made our mistakes as well.
What, for example?
You probably can. In China, you probably cannot. You cannot not make mistakes.
Part of the deal.
Yeah, part of the deal.
Do you have one mistake that you can share with us, just to give people a perspective?
Yeah, we once had a transfer pricing problem because we had clients in in Shanghai, but they wanted to have the invoices. They wanted to have the transaction charged out of Hong Kong, mm-hmm. and then you have to make sure that transfer pricing is an issue.
Yeah. And how did you then deal with that? Did you consult any specialists?
We had a specialist, and then the problem was solved.
Okay. But first you just did it on your own, and then you ran into an error or a problem?
Exactly.
Okay. Got it. And what happened then? Did the government contact you, or what happened?
No. In the end, we found it out by ourselves.
Okay.
And could solve the problem, but that is an issue.
Okay. Did you ever have any issue or contact with the Chinese government, for example? Because this is just the perception from the West that they can be like super strict and also mm-hmm. very defensive of their own industries and companies.
I think we were below the radar, because okay. That's for the bigger guys.
Right, like Google and Microsoft.
They go for the bigger guys, yeah.
Got it.
But they can also go to. SMEs shouldn't underestimate it. I think it's really money well spent if you make sure that you do things right. Yeah. And of course, for instance, in Singapore, the staff regulations are really strict.
In what way?
In what way? For instance, if you have to separate from an employee, mm-hmm. you really have to. You have to prove that this person did not perform correctly. Yeah. Otherwise, you're fined.
Wow.
Fined in the sense that you have to that you have to pay a certain amount of money to the employee.
Yeah, that's way more strict than what we are used to from Switzerland or from the US, especially, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Expanding your business internationally to Asia, for example, has a huge personal change because you suddenly start to travel way more often than you probably like to. So, can you also talk a bit more about the personal changes if you do take that step and then move your business to Asia? What does that mean to you as a CEO, as a founder, on a very personal level?
Well, I was really thrilled with that. But what I took care from the beginning, first of all, it's advisable to know your own body. For instance, I'm a night person, so I usually took the overnight the evening flights, and then I landed in the afternoon in Hong Kong or Singapore, so I could still have a meeting or a dinner with someone and then start off the next day. Nice. What really killed me is if I had to take the lunchtime flight and then you're landing in early morning, and then the day starts off again. Japan is still a problem from that point of view. And I think that is one thing. And the other thing is I found it excellent for me personally that I usually, when I'm going to Asia, I'm usually going there for 10 or 14 days. Mm-hmm. Or when we were starting to build up the Asia Pacific, I sometimes spent a month down there. And then you can really develop something. If you're just flying in for a day, for a meeting, and then flying back, I mean, that's crazy. Sure. That's totally inefficient.
You also make your body crazy by all the time differences and changes.
Exactly. And nowadays, in the beginning, when I was killing you, in the beginning, the first 2 or 3 days, I really had a jet lag at around lunchtime, till I finally learned what to eat and what not to eat. So never eat chocolate at lunchtime because I fell asleep straight away. But after a while, after a couple of years, nowadays I can fly down there and I don't have a single day of jet lag.
Wow.
It's really body gets accustomed. I don't know what's happening after the pandemic when I can fly again.
Yes. Now you lose the practice to a certain degree, right?
Exactly.
So what would you recommend to people? You said like if you spend 1 month there, you can really build things and develop things. Is that a better rhythm than just going there like once a week, every month? Would you say it's better to go there 1 full month, once a quarter, for example?
Yeah, maybe people cannot spend that much time on the ground for 1 month, but at least for 2 weeks or so, because then if one meeting falls apart, you can probably reschedule it for another day. Yeah. And your body gets adjusted to the different time zone as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are other people that say, well, if you just go there for 1 or 2 days, your body doesn't adjust, else you're coming back and you're in the same rhythm. I used to do that for 3 days ongoing when we built up the US. Mm-hmm. But there is kind of different because you're kind of ahead of time. You just wake up early in the morning.
Yeah. Got it. I would also like to talk a bit more about the differences between Europe and Asia, because you've seen both markets very well. Mm-hmm. So from your perspective, what can Europe learn from Asia?
I think what Europe can learn from Asia is the speed. And the flexibility and the agility you see in Asia. That is something we really can, and we have to be careful not to be bypassed, because I mean I just recently was listening to a virtual conference where the moderator asked the person in China, well, how can Chinese people be entrepreneurial with this type of government which is so restrictive? And the specialist there said, I've never seen a more entrepreneurial population than the Chinese.
But that's very interesting because our perception here, in the West, also because of the media and so on, is really the government is so strict, there's not that much happening. But if you are actually there, you have foot on the ground, the picture looks completely different.
Totally different. And I mean, what we hear in the media, sometimes it's so totally distorted. Yeah. Some of it is really good, but it depends on what type of media.
Right.
And in our perception, I mean, what counts most? It's privacy, it's data protection. In China, data protection is a no-brainer. I mean, Chinese even feel more protected because the government has the oversight. And if you look at the pandemic situation right now, personally, if I could decide, I would say, well, it's mandatory to use the tracing app.
Right.
Contact tracing app. It's mandatory. I mean, our individual freedom, which we claim in the West, it has its limits. And we kind of delegated the obligations to the government, and we want to have all the freedom. And in China, you first have to pursue your obligations in order to get some freedom. It's totally different.
And on the other hand, what do you think that Asia can learn from Europe?
Well, the Asians, not all of them, but Chinese, if you look at China, Chinese sometimes look to us a bit chaotic and unstructured. But that's, and they probably, if they want to work with the West, they have to approach certain things a bit more structured and a bit more process-oriented. Yeah. But that's a totally different between those two, because on the one hand, individual societies, you have a vision, you have in business, you have a vision, you have a strategy, you have a master plan, you have milestones, stuff like that, and then you start. And if the world changes, then you have to adapt your strategy first. Chinese, they kind of have a vision, and they deal with it as they go along, and that looks super chaotic for us. But they are very much more agile and faster to change to changing circumstances.
Mm-hmm. What do you think? Which model is more successful in the long run?
Depends what angle you're looking at. If you're looking at the speed, implementation speed and things like that, the Chinese model is better. If you look at the risk area, then the Western model is safer, because if you plan and look ahead, with all the options and scenarios, you're more risk averse, whereas you're more risk taking when you're not doing it, because they see the risk as when it comes up.
True, and that might be a bit late, depending on the risk.
That might be late or too late.
Right. Now, also comparing, as we already did a bit in the beginning, the Asian ecosystem, and there I mainly also think a bit about China, from a startup perspective, comparing that to the American one, which is still probably the number one ecosystem to go to with your startup. What do you think will happen in the future there? Do you think that the Asian or the Chinese ecosystem can hold a candle against the American one?
Definitely. I think they already have it today.
Okay.
It's just not so much known in the Western world.
Yeah. So do you think that this will actually change, and, for example, China will become the new hotspot?
It could very well be. If you look at Shenzhen or the Chinese Silicon Valley in around Beijing, what's happening there? I mean, things we are thinking about, they're implemented already.
Right. So I think your statement is clear that Asia is heavily underrated.
It's heavily underrated, definitely. I mean, as a simple example, I was in a hotel in Singapore, and went to have breakfast, and my omelette was done by a robot.
Nice.
It's great, isn't it?
I've never seen that here.
No, never seen it either.
No. Cool.
Or in Japan, robots are used in hospitals.
Right. Yes.
So that's, I think especially Europe has to catch up.
Yeah, we need to be careful that we don't get sort of stuck or lost in the middle.
And that danger, I think that's probably one of the biggest dangers we are facing right now.
So if China or Asia in general is still so underrated, you could also argue that this offers a lot of potential gains if you move there early, if you move there now, and actually take that step and get active in that ecosystem. Do you also see it that way, or what's your perspective?
I think as a company, I would really think about moving into that space, because honestly, I think the US is gone.
Yeah.
It still might work with the Silicon Valley, but if you look at the infrastructure they're having over there, at the educational system they're having over there, I mean, it's dramatic.
Absolutely.
And it still wants to be the world power.
Yeah.
That's scary.
It's an interesting act of balance from my perspective, because to a certain degree they should say, hey, infrastructure is working, don't fix it if it ain't broke, or really broke, although it looks that way in some parts, and somehow it's still working, but the question is probably for how long will it continue that way.
Yeah, before we see a collapse,
yeah. So, let's finish up with some last tips. Do you have any last tips or recommendations for people thinking about moving their business to Asia?
Well, getting educated on how to do business and how to get and how to get some education on the cultural differences.
Yeah. Perfect.
Really get educated before you jump onto the first time onto the plane.
Yeah. Do your homework.
Do your homework first.
That's the clear message. So, as a wrap up for this episode, we prepared some rapid fire questions. I give you either a selection of 2 or 3 choices or a short question that you can answer in 1 or 2 sentences, okay?
Okay.
So, the first question, and I have a slight assumption what you're going to say: Europe, Asia, or North America?
Asia.
Clear choice for you, I think, after that interview. The next one is wealth or happiness?
A healthy mix.
A healthy mix. Nice. We haven't heard that one before, so now you have to explain why a healthy mix, or what makes a healthy mix.
I think you need to some extent you need to be able to finance your happiness as well.
True. Well, what would that be for you? Like, where do you finance your happiness?
Well, I think if you can earn a living and so that you can finance your day-to-day expenses, that's
right.
Doesn't have to be huge wealth.
Or buying companies, instead of shopping for shoes, right? What makes you smile?
I think well-founded or well-grounded humor.
Nice. And what do you value more, experience or expertise?
That's a tough one. I think it depends. It really depends.
On what?
There are areas where you need expertise, and there are others where you can muddle through with experience.
Yeah. And the last one for you today: where do you go to think?
In front of the fireplace.
Great. Doris, thank you so much for the insights and the valuable tips. I
You're
hope
welcome.
that more people think about expanding their business to Asia, and they now know where to look for advice and support. So thank you so much for the time, for the great insights, and we wish you all the best and lots of success for the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode. Stay connected with the Swisspreneur community through our LinkedIn and Instagram profiles. Make sure to subscribe to our show on whatever podcast platform you're using. See you next week for a brand new episode of the Swisspreneur Show.